Alright everyone, we're doing more GeoNodes. So last video, we made this nicer sleeve retopo, and I've duplicated the same setup we had in that video, but for the shirt, except I haven't done the UV map yet. If you haven't watched the last video, go watch it, because this is a direct continuation, and it won't make sense without it. So in the last video, I had to do UV cleanup on the sleeve before we could retopologize it. And I did that with the UV Toolkit add-on, which I then realized I had confused with the TexTools add-on. UV Toolkit is paid, TexTools is free, although they have the same features. The ones I use exist in both and many other add-ons, like UV Squares is also free and it has snap with equals distance, which is the same as the distribution tool from UV Toolkit. So then I went to put TexTools and UV Squares and stuff in the description of the video, and I realized TexTools hasn't been updated for Blender 4.0 and it's broken. And this just reminded me how much of a hassle it is to edit UVs at all. And that is why the subject of this video is how we can change our UV map with mesh editing tools so that we never have to worry about any of this UV add-on stuff ever again. Alright, so a UV position is just a XY position for each vertex, which is why we can make this mesh, which just inputs this mesh and sets the position to be the UV, although, rotated by Z. That's what we learned last video. So we just want to go the other direction. We want to take a mesh with whatever position and then tell this mesh to use that as the UV map. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But there are a few things to keep in mind. First, let's turn off everything we don't need. And I'm going to grab a copy of our UV ref mesh and visual geometry to mesh, which is the same as applying everything. And now I can go into its UV, which is the same, and if I start making changes to this mesh, like I'm going to go for active element, which means that it uses the highlighted vertex. So now if I do a SX scale on X, it straightens everything. This is the same functionality as some of the straighten tools I was using in the previous video. And so it's pretty easy to turn this into a clean rectangle. X, not Y. And now the Loop Tools add-on, which comes with Blender and you can go enable, has the wonderful space command to evenly space things down an edge loop. So do that on everything. And if we now want to clean up the interior of this shape, we can go into our sculpt mode and get the smooth brush and set it to auto-mask mesh boundaries. And now we can just smooth this out and it won't affect the interior, or it'll only affect the interior. And this is literally the same as the UV smooth brush in UV space. So we're already editing our UV map as mesh. That part is easy. Now it's just a matter of how we get this back over here. So we changed the mesh, now we need to update the UV map. We can do that with project from view. Now it's got the new shape, but it's shifted everything because the camera wasn't exactly aligned like before. We can do a project from bounds, which is consistent, but that will stretch everything. So the way we could fix this is we add a plane, and this plane will be naturally 1 by 1. So we would need to scale it, or it's 2 by 2, scale it by 0.5, then move it up by 0.5. And now if we project from bounds, and that's inside, now we can keep a consistent bounds, and then this would be easier to work with. But this causes a bunch of problems because we'd have to then delete this plane after, otherwise it messes up the index order when we transfer things back. So that's something we will solve with GeoNodes. Let's undo all of that junk. So before we fix that, we'll just do the regular project from view, even though it's flawed. And I'll show you how to get this UV map back onto the main mesh, which is pretty simple. We will get the Data Transfer Modifier. We will uncheck this object transform because then it lines things up based on their origin points. So it will count these two things as being in the same place, even though they're offset visually. That just makes it easier to work with. We'll target that. Face data, topology, UVs. Now we have updated it. So if we go back here and we make some other change, and then we update it again, it's going to keep updating because that is a live data transfer modifier. But we have to keep doing that step of projecting from view. So that's the part we're going to automate with Geo Nodes. All right, so first things first, I'm going to add one of those planes like I had earlier. And I'm going to set this to wire view. And that's just there so that we can keep track of our UV bounds. We're just going to call that UV bounds ref. And now what we're going to do is a GeoNodes group that updates the UV map from the position as we go. So let's get a switch over to GeoNodes here. This is going to be a very simple group. We're just going to get the current position of the mesh and a store named attribute. And for it to actually update this UV map attribute, rather than just making a generic attribute called UV map, we need to set to the right type. So that is a 2D vector and a face corner. If it's set to anything else, it won't write to the right attribute, even if we put it in here. So as soon as I have this on, this disappears because currently everything is set to 0. So we will set it to position. And now it's a squished line. And that's because it's expecting an X and Y only. It's only a 2D vector. But this is an X and Z. So we essentially have to undo the transform that we've done before. So let's get a vector rotate on Euler and do a -90 transformation. And now it's there, but it's offset by a bit. So we also want a vector math. And we'll add 0.5. And now things are lined up again. And we could add a multiply for scaling this as well if we wanted. So if we hadn't done these offsets in our existing GeoNodes group, in our unwrap group here, we wouldn't need to redo them if we just left everything alone. Or we could potentially even like record these and reapply them or something. But for now, this will be good enough. So now, as we work, this is just updating in real time. So now we can actually get in there and work on our UV version of the mesh, which I'll bump over a little bit more. And it's going to be actively updating this stuff. And it's updating the UV here. So that means if we move this patch around that's being projected, our retopology, that's already good to go. And it's working live on these changes. So keep in mind that we are working with a giant restriction here. Anything we do has to not change the number of face corners in this mesh. And you may be wondering, what is a face corner? Well, you know what a vertex is, and you know what a face is, and you know what an edge is. Well, face corners are the secret hidden fourth data domain. And every face has a corner for each vertex. So a quad like this has 4 corners. And basically, face corners are what allows you to have different data on different sides of an edge. They allow like split meshes. So for example, if we go into vertex paint, we can work on either face or vertex mode. So if we're working on vertex mode, we paint a vertex, and then it's coloring the corners near it. This is interpolated across the face to the next vertex. And if you have the same value on everything, then the face will be a solid color. Or we can undo all that. I don't know why I have to hit the button multiple times to get one thing. All right, or we go to face mode. And now we're painting on just the corners. So it's called face mode, but it's actually face corners mode. But they hide the existence of corners from you. So now we have different values on both sides of this. And this is possible because of face corners. So you may have noticed when we did the UV transfer over here, this data transfer is set on face corner data, and that's because UVs are face corner data, because you need to be able to split them into islands. Whereas if they were vertex data, then you couldn't split things. And if they were face data, it would always be the same value for the entire face and wouldn't be useful. So this is a long way of saying that we can change the number of vertices, just like you do in the UV editor, but we can't change the number of faces or face corners. So we can do something like merge these. And also merge these. These are darts from Marvelous Designer. And everything is still happy. It hasn't broken the transfer or anything. And now I can actually get rid of these unnecessary extra seams. And we can proceed in cleaning up our mesh. But as soon as I do something like add a face, now it's broken the transfer. And this actually doesn't have to break the transfer. The Data Transfer Modifier has a feature where if the meshes don't match well enough, it'll throw this error and shut itself off. But if instead of using the Data Transfer Modifier, we used a Geometry Nodes group, then it wouldn't care about this extra face. And the reason for that is because when you add a new face like this, it's going to be added at the end of the index order of the mesh. The way these transfers work is it's transferring the data from face corner 1 of this mesh to face corner 1 of this mesh. So this new face is going to be face number 495. So it goes to transfer data from 495, and there is no 495 in this version, so just nothing happens. So the reason that GeoNodes will allow you to do this transfer, even if you add stuff, it just won't do anything, but it won't break. Whereas the Data Transfer Modifier puts this error in to protect you, because if the new face changed the vertex order or the face order and caused it to recalculate the order, then it would mess up everything. So technically we could get around this, but there's not really any reason we would want to. And another thing I'd like to note is that currently we are using this other mesh to update our UVs, and that's so that we can hand model it. If we were doing something like procedurally changing the UVs, we could do that purely in GeoNodes without needing this extra mesh. And then as we updated the basis, like if we were using a lattice to distort these UVs into a new shape, then it could all be procedural and non-destructive. So this is a destructive workflow I'm showing you. And maybe in the future we'll get to non-destructive stuff, but for the most part, this is what you're going to want anyway. All right, well, that's pretty much it for the GeoNodes, actually. Like, that's it. Like, it's that simple. Now you can do all of your UV editing as mesh with the full suite of mesh tools with, great add-ons like loop tools and with sculpt mode, and, you could use an armature. In the future, we're going to look at some fancy stuff like how you can use converting the corners of islands into curves and then turning those curves into a box and stretching things into boxes. But we're going to take things one bite size at a time, so we're not going to talk about that yet. But I don't want to leave everybody hanging, so let me show you a quick way that we can work with this that would actually solve some of these problems. So I'm going to chuck this stuff down here for now, and let's focus on just cleaning up this piece. And I'm going to show you a way to clean this up and then retopo it. So this isn't going to be a clean rectangle, but we can get it cleaner than this. Let's start off with using that active element and scale on Z to 0, scale on X to 0, scale this one on X to 0. I want to keep this lined up here because on the actual garment, it's important to keep that. So I'd like everything else to be evenly spaced, but this part isn't actually. Let's drop that down. We'll hit the stuff with the space tool. And same thing over here. My general policy is that I set everything to be the furthest out point. There. Space this, but not with that last point selected. So now our boundaries are pretty cleaned up. Actually, I shouldn't have done it on this one down here. So let's do that again. No problem, nice and easy. So that's pretty clean. And now I want to clean this up in sculpt mode. So we've got our smooth brush again. And now it's going to mess that loop up. So another trick you can use is if you hide this, then as far as it's concerned, that's the boundary now. So we'll just spam this. Now I should note, this is a quick and dirty way, And this works because this mesh already has basically even vertex distribution, because that's the point of Marvelous Designer's topology. If you're making your UV map some other way, there's no guarantee that this is going to give you a clean result, because this just tries to evenly space things out when you use that smooth brush. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that. That's good enough. Now we have to figure out how we use our retopo input to make something useful here. So I'm going to snap that there and that there. And let's just make a nice big grid. And I've still got my active element alignment. So I'm just scaling to 0. And let's get this stuff lined up with that top point. All right, so now we've got the bounds. And now I'm going to turn this into a grid. Got that there. Now I know I want about the same resolution as this, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we'll put 6 there, and we'll match that here. That's about the same size. And I guess that looks like it's about square, right? This could be more precise, but I'm sure it's going to be good enough. So I want roughly this, and if we look up here, that's already being projected on by our GeoNodes group. It's just that everything that is off the UV map is getting stuck to the closest point on it, which is looking pretty bad at the color. But I would be pretty happy to have this. Maybe I'd do the edges a bit differently. But this is a way that you will see topology done sometimes, if your goal is just a very even square grid, which may not be the thing you need every time, but it is good to have. So I just want to cut out everything outside the pattern. So I could go through with the knife tool and start doing one for every vertex, and this is kind of manual and tedious. So there's an easier way to do that process, which is I'm going to copy this, because this is a live GeoNodes mesh, or not this one, copy that. I'm going to drag it out of the collection and Visual Geo to mesh. And I'm also going to copy this, because I don't like doing destructive things on the same mesh. And I'll keep this one and use that one, because that's what's being targeted here. And now what we can do is use the knife project tool. So here's the procedure. You select the mesh you want to cut, and you go into edit mode. Then in the outliner, you shift select the mesh you want to cut with. It has to be shift select, which is annoying if you have multiple things in the collection, because it will select everything between these. If you do a control select, it bumps you out of object mode. It's a bit weird, but that's why I move this out of the collection. So we shift select, then we go to mesh, knife project, and it has cut the cutter mesh into the target mesh. And now we have all of that. And we actually have a bunch of internal stuff that we don't want. Undo that cut. We will modify our cutter mesh. I'm going to grab just the edges that I want and delete everything else. And then I've got a double here when I had seams earlier, so we'll do a merge by distance. Now repeat. And we have those edges cut in. Now to quickly get rid of all the external stuff, let's loop select these, mark as seams, and go into face mode. And now you can use L to select just faces in that island and delete them. And then we can delete those seams. So now we have the right shape. And if we look up here, that's actually behaving very nicely. But of course, this gives us uneven topology on the edge. We should clean this up and dissolve some verts. And depending on what you do here, you could end up with n-gons. Like this is not a quad. So, this is this isn't necessarily what you want for your retopology. So you could move on from here and clean this up more and resolve it to be what you want, or you could do something totally different. Since you have this laid flat, you could do some non-quad, non-grid topology. I'm a big fan of that to clean up edges. Let's say I for extrude inner, but I don't have the right settings. So We'll talk more about that other subject in later videos. I haven't really decided how I want to handle it for this outfit anyway. But for now, I think that's it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. I'm going to keep doing like little blogs as I continue working on this character. So also follow me on Twitter for more regular posts and seeing how things work. And also that's the easiest place to ask me questions. I think the next video I'm going to talk about wrapping things onto other things and displacing so that you can get volume off of a mesh. So stay tuned for that.